Have you ever heard of Jason and Medea, but what do you really know about the Golden Fleece? The legend says it could grant infinite power, but what happened to those who dared to seek this secret? Get ready to discover the true story behind this epic journey, filled with betrayals, magic, and a destiny no one could have imagined. Jason and his Argonauts faced monsters, gods, and impossible challenges to obtain the Golden Fleece. But what truly awaited them at the end of this quest? Who was the real threat? The gods or the heroes themselves? And what happened to Medea, the woman who did everything to ensure the success of the mission, but in the end found herself dragged into a tragic fate? Stay until the end, because the truth behind the Golden Fleece is much darker and more mysterious than you can imagine. Let's uncover the secrets of one of the greatest stories in mythology. Prepare to see Jason and Medea in a way you've never seen them before. The city of Iolcus was asleep when betrayal struck. King Aeson, weakened and without allies, saw his own brother Peleus seize the throne by force. With a cold and calculated blow, Peleus eliminated anyone who could challenge him. But there was a problem. Aeson had a son, a legitimate heir. Jason was just a baby, but he already carried within him a threat to the new king. Peleus knew that if he let the child live, one day he might return to claim the throne. So he ordered that the boy be found and eliminated. Jason's mother, desperate, had no time to waste. In the middle of the night, she wrapped her son in cloths and handed him to a trusted man. He set off quickly, crossing mountains and forests, until he reached the home of Chiron, a wise centaur known for training great heroes. There, Jason grew up away from the eyes of the usurper. Under Chiron's guidance, he learned to fight, to hunt, and to understand the secrets of the world. But, above all, he learned about his true destiny. Time passed and the boy became a man. Strong, clever, and determined, Jason knew he couldn't run forever. One day he would have to return to Iolcus and confront the man who stole his birthright. And that day was fast approaching. The winds of change were blowing over Iolcus. Peleus, now aged, ruled with an iron fist, unaware that the danger he had feared since his rise to power was about to knock on his door. Jason, now a strong and fearless man, descended from the mountains, determined to take back what was rightfully his. With a spear in hand and his heart burning with purpose, he walked into the city, where the people quickly realized that this young warrior was no stranger. His gaze, his posture, even the way he spoke reminded them of the former king Aeson. Whispers began to spread. The rightful heir had returned. The news quickly reached Peleus's ears. The usurper, seeing Jason before his throne, forced a smile and pretended to be unaffected. With cunning, he feigned surprise and even affection for his nephew, asking where he had been all these years. Jason was not fooled. Without hesitation, he demanded that Peleus return the throne he had stolen from his father. The king, however, would not yield so easily. He knew that if he refused the request outright, he could lose the support of the people who were beginning to lean toward the young heir. So with a malicious gleam in his eye, he proposed a challenge. Of course, Jason, the throne may be yours, but only if you prove that the gods are on your side. Bring me the Golden Fleece, the sacred skin of the ram that was blessed by the gods themselves and rests in the distant land of Colchis. Only a worthy king could accomplish such a feat. The court fell silent. Everyone knew that the fleece was guarded by a fierce dragon, and no one had ever returned alive from such a quest. To Peleus, it was a death sentence disguised as a mission, but Jason did not hesitate. He straightened his shoulders, looked his uncle in the eye, and declared before everyone, "If this is the condition to take my rightful place, then let it be so. I will bring the Golden Fleece." And so the young hero's fate was sealed. Jason knew that the journey to Colchis would be long and dangerous. The Golden Fleece was beyond the sea, guarded by unknown forces, and no one had ever returned alive from an attempt to capture it. To face this challenge, He would need a ship worthy of the gods themselves. That was when he sought out Argos, the greatest shipbuilder in Greece, a man whose talent was as legendary as the stories of the heroes who sailed the seas. Jason went to him and explained his mission. "I need the best ship ever built," he declared. "One that can face storms, monsters, and the dangers awaiting me beyond the horizon." Argos, a man of few words, studied Jason for a moment and then nodded. Without wasting any time, he gathered the best craftsmen and began to work. But this would not be an ordinary vessel. To make it truly special, Argos received the help of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who blessed the wood with her magic and placed a piece of the sacred wood of Dodona in the hull, capable of speaking and giving advice to the crew. After weeks of hard work, the ship was finally ready. Argo, as it was named in honor of its creator, was a marvel of the seas. Fast, sturdy, and built to challenge the limits of the known world, its hull gleamed in the sunlight, and its sails were ready to catch the winds of adventure. Now, all that was left was to find the men who would have the courage to embark on this journey, and Jason knew exactly who to call. A ship like the Argo needed a crew to match. Jason could not face the dangers of the unknown alone. He needed the best warriors, hunters and adventurers in Greece, men and women willing to challenge the impossible. Messengers were sent to all the cities, spreading the news. Jason, heir of Iolcus, was seeking heroes for a great expedition to find the Golden Fleece. Within days, the greatest names in mythology began to appear. Among the first to arrive was Hercules, the demigod with unparalleled strength who accepted the mission only to test his own limits. Then came Orpheus, the poet and musician whose singing could tame beasts and even move the hearts of the gods. Atalanta, the hunter as swift as the wind, was the only woman to join the expedition, determined to prove she was as brave as any man. The twins, Castor and Pollux, sons of Zeus, brought their skills in combat and navigation. Zetes and Calais, sons of the wind Boreas, were winged and could fly like birds. Along with them came warriors such as Telamon, father of the future hero, Ajax and Meleager, the slayer of the Caledonian boar. Each one brought a unique strength, forming a legendary group known as the Argonauts. When everyone had gathered, Jason boarded the Argo and looked at his companions. The weight of the mission fell on his shoulders, but he showed no fear. "Destiny calls us," he shouted. "We sail to Colchis, and together we will claim the Golden Fleece." The Argonauts raised their weapons and shouted in response. The ropes were released, the oars cut through the water, and the Argo glided across the open sea. The journey had begun. The winds were favorable, and the Argo sliced through the waves like a spear thrown by the gods. For days, the Argonauts sailed without difficulty until they spotted an unknown island on the horizon. Jason ordered them to approach to seek supplies and water. What they didn't know was that they were about to enter a true spell of desires and dangers. The island was Lemnos, and its people held a dark secret. Years before, the women of Lemnos had been cursed by Aphrodite, who, jealous, made their husbands reject them for others. Enraged, they took vengeance in the worst possible way. They killed all the men on the island. Since then they had lived there alone, ruled by their queen, Hypsipyle. When the Argonauts landed, they were not met with hostility, but with joy. The women saw in them an opportunity for a fresh start. With beauty and cunning, they surrounded the heroes with dances, feasts, and promises of love. Many began to forget the mission. Jason, seduced by Hypsipyle, seemed enchanted by the queen. The same happened with the other warriors, who soon settled in, enjoying the pleasures the island offered. But not everyone fell under the spell. Hercules, with his indomitable will, sensed the danger. Furious, he gathered his companions and reminded them of the reason they were there. We came for glory, not comfort. The Golden Fleece awaits us, and we will not be remembered as men who lost themselves in the arms of pleasure. Their screams woke the heroes from their trance. Ashamed, they left the island at dawn, bidding farewell to their hostesses. Some women cried, others wished them luck, and some, already pregnant, knew that the legacy of the Argonauts would live on there for generations. The Argo returned to the sea. The heroes had learned a lesson. Danger doesn't always appear as an armed monster. Sometimes it arrives with a smile and a gentle touch. After leaving Lemnos, the Argonauts continued their journey, now more aware of the dangers that might arise with each stop. The Argo cut through the waves with speed, and for a time, the journey proceeded without major obstacles. But the peace didn't last long. After days of sailing, the heroes spotted a new island and decided to stop to rest and resupply. The land seemed deserted, covered by dense forests and rocky mountains. The group disembarked cautiously, exploring the region. They found crystal-clear rivers, wild fruits, and a pleasant climate, a true paradise. But tranquility was soon interrupted by a thunderous noise that shook the ground. From the top of the mountains, giant creatures appeared. They were the feared Gagains, colossal monsters with 6 arms, skin as tough as stone, and eyes glowing with fury. They were the guardians of the island and did not tolerate intruders. Without warning, the giants descended upon the Argonauts, throwing huge stones and wielding heavy clubs. The group split up, trying to protect themselves, but the force of the enemies was overwhelming. Even the most experienced warriors struggled to face them. Hercules, however, did not hesitate. With a war cry, he raised his club and attacked the first giant, crushing its skull with a single blow. Inspired by the demigod, the other heroes joined the fight. Castor and Pollux used their agility to dodge and strike with precision. Meleager and Telamon pierced the monsters with their spears, while Atalanta fired accurate arrows at the creatures' eyes. But the giants were many. The battle grew more difficult, and exhaustion began to weigh on the heroes. Then Orpheus, the musician of the gods, had an idea. "Stop fighting and listen," he shouted as he picked up his lyre. Even amid the chaos, his fingers glided across the strings of the instrument, and a hypnotic melody filled the air. The sound enveloped the giants who, stunned, began to move more slowly, their eyes growing heavy. One by one, they fell to the ground, asleep from the power of the music. Jason wasted no time. He ordered the heroes to run back to the Argo before the monsters woke up. The group hurried aboard and rowed with all their might. By the time the giants awoke, the ship was already far, disappearing over the horizon. The island had been a tough test, but the Argonauts had proven once again that united, they could overcome any challenge, whether through strength, strategy, or cunning. The journey continued, and the Argonauts found themselves growing ever closer, not only from adversity, but also from friendship and mutual respect. The sea, which once seemed like just an obstacle to overcome, had become familiar to them, like an old friend guiding them. However, not everything in the mission was proceeding smoothly. During a stop to rest and repair the damage from the battle with the giants, an unexpected event occurred. Hercules' companion, the young Hylas, was drawn into a nearby forest by a mysterious presence. The beauty of the water nymphs, enchanting and mysterious, seduced Hylas, who wandered away from the group without realizing the imminent danger. As night fell and the Argonauts were preparing to depart, they noticed that Hylas was not among them. Hercules, worried, immediately set out to search for him, calling everyone to help. The search lasted for hours until, finally, Hercules found the clearing where his friend had been taken. But it was too late. Hylas was in the power of the water nymphs, who had kept him prisoner in one of the island's lakes. Hercules, with his immense strength, tried to rescue the young man, but the nymphs, with their charms and magic, held him firmly. Hercules, tears were visible, But his pain was accompanied by a difficult decision. He could no longer continue the journey. "I can't leave him," said Hercules, his voice broken with sadness. "The mission may be important, but friendship and sacrifice are worth more." The Argonauts, sorrowful, tried to convince Hercules to move on, but the demigod was resolute. He said his goodbyes to his friends and, with a broken heart, chose to stay on the island, waiting for the moment when he could rescue Hylas from the nymph's hands. With that, the Argo departed without Hercules. The group moved on, but the weight of the demigod's departure lingered with them. Jason, more than ever, knew that the journey would be long and full of sacrifices. The mission was far from over, and new challenges awaited on the horizon. Tusi, winds remained favorable, and the Argo sailed across the vast sea, with the Argonauts growing closer to Colchis. However, before reaching their final destination, another surprise awaited them. The journey led them to a remote island where a king ruled, feared by all, Amycus, a brutal and arrogant monarch. When the Argonauts disembarked, they were greeted with apparent cordiality, but soon realized they were falling into a trap. Amycus, eager to test his strength and show his supremacy, challenged the heroes to a boxing match. However, this was no ordinary challenge. Whoever lost would be executed. The king, with his massive muscles and immense strength, knew that his victory was practically guaranteed. He announced the competition with a cruel smile, emphasizing that no man could defeat him. The Argonauts, reluctant, looked at one another, until Pollux, Castor's fearless twin, stepped forward. "I accept the challenge," declared Pollux confidently. Everyone knew that Pollux was not only a skilled fighter, but also a master at boxing. He and his brother Castor had trained since they were very young with the best masters in Greece, and his ability was unquestionable. The fight began. Amycus charged forward with all his might, trying to knock Pollux down with powerful blows, but the young hero, agile and quick, dodged with ease, taunting the king with his dexterity. Every punch from Amycus was expertly avoided, and Pollux took the opportunity to land a precise blow to the monarch's stomach. Amycus, unable to react in time, collapsed to the ground with a thud. He tried to rise, but the pain was too much. With one last effort, he tried to raise his hand, signaling his surrender, but he was already defeated. Pollux stood victorious, while the Argonauts, relieved, celebrated the win. Amycus, humiliated, was left behind, and the heroes moved forward, but not before ensuring that no further challenges awaited them in his lands. With lighter hearts, but still bearing the weight of their mission, the Argonauts resumed their journey, now more confident that together they could face any obstacle, whether monsters, kings, or even the gods themselves. The Golden Fleece was still waiting. The journey continued to test the Argonauts, and the sea seemed to grow more treacherous. The Argo sailed toward the Strait of Hellespont, where a new mystery awaited. There, the heroes encountered a dark and solitary island, home to a strange man known to many as Phineus, the blind prophet. Phineus was a man of great wisdom, but his life was marked by a cruel curse. The gods, angered by his prophecies and revelations, had punished him with endless torture. He was constantly tormented by the Harpies. These creatures, half woman and half bird, with black wings and sharp claws, would steal all of Phineus's food and drink, causing him to live in eternal hunger and suffering. Every time he tried to eat or drink, the Harpies appeared from nowhere and ruined his meal, leaving him starving and weak. When the Argonauts arrived on the island, they immediately saw the prophet suffering. He was in a pitiful state, his body weak and his clothes dirty. Despite his condition, Phineus welcomed them with a look of gratitude. He knew that the group of heroes might be his last hope. "If you help me get rid of these creatures, I will help." "You on your journey?" said the prophet, his voice full of despair. The Argonauts didn't hesitate. They knew Phineus's wisdom could be crucial to their mission's success, and helping end his torture seemed the right thing to do. It was then that Calais and Zetes, the winged brothers, took the lead. They were sons of Boreas, the god of the wind, and had the ability to fly at the speed of the wind. With their powerful wings, they soared into the sky, ready to face the harpies. The creatures didn't take long to appear, with their shrill screams and black feathers slicing through the air. The harpies attacked, trying to get close to Phineus, but Calais and Zetes were ready. With their sharp spears and aerial skills, the winged brothers struck at the creatures, driving them away from Phineus. A fierce battle followed, but the harpies, once thought to be invincible, were now being defeated. The wind blew strongly, and the creatures were pushed away, unable to attack again. Finally, after an intense struggle, the harpies were forced to flee, disappearing into the dark clouds of the sky. Phineus, now free from his torment, fell to his knees, relieved. He thanked the heroes, offering them valuable predictions and advice about the future. He warned Jason about the dangers to come, particularly about the straits of the crushing rocks and the great challenge awaiting them in Colchis. With the harpies finally defeated and Phineus's promise of guidance, the Argonauts set out again, ready to face the next chapter of their epic journey. With each step, the mission seemed closer, but the challenges were far from over. The Golden Fleece was still a distant dream, and the road to it was filled with dangers. The Argo continued its journey through unknown seas, facing winds and storms. But the greatest challenge was yet to come. The prophet Phineus had warned the Argonauts about the strait known as the Crushing Rocks, a dangerous narrow passage where huge rocks moved, as if they had a life of their own. These rocks collided violently, destroying any ship that attempted to pass through, creating a deadly labyrinth. As the Argo approached the area, a dense and threatening cloud covered the horizon, and the heroes felt the weight of the tension in the air. The strength of the waves and winds already indicated that they were about to enter one of the deadliest passages of the journey. Jason, with his mind focused on the mission and Phineus's advice, kept calm. He knew that the key to passing through the crushing rocks was timing and precision. The heroes, aware of the risk, prepared for what was to come. "We need a strategy," said Jason, gathering his friends. "We'll send a bird ahead to check the opening of the rocks. Once it passes unharmed, we'll know the exact timing to cross." And so, the Argonaut chosen for the mission was Iphicles, one of the best archers and observers in the group. Armed with a slingshot and impressive agility, he released a bird that, flying ahead of the ship, would guide the Argo. As the bird flew, the rocks began to move. It was a terrifying sight. Huge stone blocks moved frantically, closing in every second with a colossal rumble. The Argo, in turn, prepared to move as soon as the bird reached the safety zone. The tension was palpable. The bird flew ahead with agility, passing between the rocks that opened and closed, forming a threatening curtain of stone. Time seemed to stretch, but the creature passed unharmed, and everyone saw the safety window open. "Now!" shouted Jason, his voice firm like that of a leader. With a decisive command, the crew rowed with strength and precision. The Argo shot forward, like an arrow, taking advantage of the gap the bird had revealed. The rocks moved, almost as if they wanted to crush the ship, but the heroes, with their skill, barely managed to escape. The sound of the rocks crashing echoed in the distance, but the Argo was already on the other side, free from immediate danger. All the Argonauts, exhausted and sweating, let out a collective sigh of relief. They knew they had passed yet another test, but the feeling that much more lay ahead was inescapable. The Golden Fleece was close, but not without more challenges. Each victory brought them closer to the great reward, but also made them more aware of the price they would have to pay. What else awaited them in the lands of Colchis? What would come after that dangerous strait? Only fate could tell, but for now the Argo sailed on, heading into the unknown. After successfully crossing the deadly strait of the crushing rocks, the Argonauts were exhausted, but their spirit of adventure was stronger than ever. The Argo continued toward the legendary Colchis, a land of mysteries and riches, where the Golden Fleece rested, guarded by King Aeetes, a feared and cruel monarch. As they neared the coast, the island of Colchis appeared before them, with its dense forests and snow-covered mountains. It was a wild land where magic and divine power intertwined. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and the heroes sensed that they were about to face an even greater trial. Upon landing, they were met with a cold and suspicious reception. Aeetes, the king, watched from his imposing palace, and his reputation as an unyielding ruler soon became clear. He knew of the Argonauts' arrival and Jason's request, but his attitude was that of a man who would never give in without a fight. Jason, with his dignified stance, approached the king and made his demand. "King Aeetes, I come to claim the Golden Fleece, a relic of my father that was stolen. To return what is mine, I ask you, please, to give me the fleece." Aeetes, however, was not an easy man to convince. He looked at Jason with disdain and said, "Nothing comes free in my land. If you want the fleece, you must first prove your worth. For that, you will have to complete an impossible task." Jason, without hesitation, accepted the king's challenge. Aeetes, with a malicious smile, revealed the task he had planned. He ordered Jason to tame 2 fire-breathing bulls, monstrous creatures with bronze hooves and fiery breath. Then Jason would have to plow a magical field with the bulls without being consumed by the flames. The task seemed impossible. The fire-breathing bulls were known for their violence and devastating power, and the magical field was protected by enchantments that made any attempt to plow it useless, unless the task was executed perfectly. The Argonauts looked at each other, aware that this mission could be the end of the journey for many of them. It was at this moment, however, that the real Medea, daughter of King Aeetes, stepped onto the scene. She, a sorceress of immense power, had been watching Jason and his companions with curiosity since their arrival. She knew the king's intentions and the risks he posed to Jason, and something inside her made her act unexpectedly. Medea, enchanted by Jason, approached him and whispered, "I can help you. I'm the only one who can offer a solution." Medea revealed to Jason that she possessed a powerful spell, a magical potion that would protect him from the fire-breathing bulls and help him complete the task. She knew that King Aeetes would never give up the fleece without such an impressive feat, and she offered her help, but at a cost. Jason, with no other options, accepted her offer. With the potion in hand, Medea cast a protective spell and gave Jason a magical amulet. He was now ready to face the bulls. When the challenge began, the entire Argo watched, fearful. Jason mounted the fire-breathing bulls, and with Medea's spell empowering him, he tamed them, guiding them with impressive skill. With control over the fierce creatures, he was able to plow the magical field, completing the task set by Aeetes. The king, though furious, had no choice but to acknowledge Jason's victory. The impossible task was done, and the Golden Fleece now seemed within reach of the heroes. However, Aeetes had no intention of giving up easily, and his hostility was just beginning. The real battle for the fleece was about to start, and Jason knew the great battle was still to come. The glow of victory over the fire-breathing bulls was overshadowed by the growing tension that hung over the Argonauts. Despite Jason's impressive feat, King Aeetes remained unwavering. He honored his promise and handed over the Golden Fleece, but a dark expression dominated his face. It wasn't just an honorable gesture. He felt something was being taken from him. Not just the fleece, but the control over his daughter, Medea, who was visibly enchanted by Jason. Medea, the king's daughter, was not only a powerful sorceress, but also a woman marked by a profound loneliness, surrounded by her father's strict laws and expectations. When she first saw Jason, something within her awakened, perhaps a feeling of empathy, but also an irresistible passion. She was willing to risk everything to help him, even if it meant betraying her own blood. Medea approached Jason during the night when the camp was silent, and her presence, like a mysterious shadow, brought an air of tension to the scene. With a soft voice, she spoke, "Jason, you've achieved the impossible, but there's still more to be done." Jason looked at her, noticing the seriousness in her eyes. He already knew that Medea's help had been crucial in his victory over the fire-breathing bulls, but now she seemed more distant, deeper, as though something was at stake that he didn't fully understand. "What more can I do?" he asked, curiosity and apprehension in his voice. Medea hesitated for a moment, but soon gave in to her impulse. She knew that without her help, Jason would never escape Colchis with the Golden Fleece. And more than that, she knew that their fates were irreversibly intertwined. "I will help you get the fleece, but you need to trust me. My father won't just give it up. He'll try to kill you as soon as he can. I need you to be quick, but you'll also need my help for what's to come." Jason, without hesitation, accepted what Medea offered. He trusted her, even though he knew she was going against her own family. What he didn't know was that the bond between them was about to become something deeper, something that would surpass any loyalty or duty. She was willing to sacrifice much for him, more than he could ever imagine, with a spell that enveloped her in an aura of power. Medea guided Jason to the cave where the Golden Fleece was kept. There she revealed her most powerful magic, a sleeping potion that would make the dragon guarding the fleece fall into a deep sleep. When Jason entered the cave, the dragon, a massive creature with eyes that glowed like fire, was motionless, but not asleep. The beast's gaze was terrifying, and its presence made the environment feel suffocating. Medea, with her magic, whispered ancient words, casting the potion around the dragon. The creature immediately began to fall asleep, its large eyes slowly closing until finally the monster fell into a deep, peaceful slumber. With the beast asleep, Jason advanced and took the Golden Fleece, which shimmered under the moonlight like a divine wonder. He knew that the goal was nearly completed, but the weight of everything that had happened so far began to show. He wasn't just stealing a king's relic, but also gaining trust and loyalty that could come with a price. As the group prepared to flee, Medea, with her serious and determined expression, spoke softly to Jason. "Now you have the fleece, but know that the way back won't be easy. Ites won't let this go. Prepare for what's coming." Jason looked at her, now more than ever aware of the intensity of the situation. He had what he came for, but the journey was far from over. The choices he and Medea had made were starting to unravel a fate he could no longer control. The Golden Fleece was in his hands, but in Jason's mind, one question echoed. How far was he willing to go to keep what he now possessed? With the Golden Fleece in hand, the Argonauts knew that the way back would be fraught with danger. Atis, the king of Colchis, was not someone who would easily accept the loss of his greatest relic. When the king learned of Jason's escape, his heart filled with rage, and he immediately ordered his soldiers to prepare to pursue the intruders. Jason's mission was far from finished. The price for possessing the Golden Fleece would be high. However, there was something else Jason didn't know. King Atis was about to cheat. Though he had promised to give the fleece to Jason after he completed the tasks, he never intended to honor his word. When the king saw Medea's determination to help him and her betrayal of her own father, he decided to take revenge. He planned to capture the Argonauts and somehow make them pay for their audacity. Medea, realizing her father's treacherous intentions, knew that the only way to save Jason and the rest of the crew was to act quickly. She then made a terrible decision. She betrayed King Eetes by killing her brother, Absyrtus. It was a devastating choice for her, a deep pain that could never be erased. Medea, with trembling hands, murdered her brother and scattered his parts across the sea, hoping the king would stop his pursuit to collect the remains. The act, though necessary, weighed heavily on Medea's heart, and the burden of guilt haunted her ever since. When Absyrtus's blood was spilled and cast into the sea, Medea's plan began to work. Eetes, furious and confused, immediately halted his pursuit. He couldn't ignore the death of his own son, and for a moment his rage was greater than his desire to recover the Golden Fleece. This gave the Argonauts the time they needed to escape Colchis. The Argo sailed hastily away from the shore, the sound of the waves crashing against the hull mixing with the distant sound of Eetes's fury. Medea, though satisfied with the success of the escape, felt the weight of the sacrifice on her shoulders. She knew that sooner or later King Aeetes and his kingdom would seek revenge. Jason, now with the fleece, was relieved by the victory, but his gratitude for Medea was mixed with emotional confusion. He understood what she had done for him, but the price paid for this victory seemed too high, not only because of Absyrtus's death, but because of what it meant for Medea. He didn't yet understand how much the betrayal and the sacrifices had marked her, and what that would mean for the future. "Now we have the fleece," Jason said, his expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "But we know we didn't escape unscathed. The king will follow us, and we'll have to be ready for what comes next." Medea, with a silent sadness, nodded. She knew that the escape was only temporary. She had saved the Argonauts, but the cost had been too high. The sadness in her eyes was deep, reflecting the weight of the choices she had made. Now, with the Golden Fleece in hand and a dangerous hunt ahead, the Argonauts sailed toward the unknown, knowing that victory over King Aeetes was still far from guaranteed. Everyone's fate was intertwined, and for Jason, the way home seemed more uncertain than ever. What else would be needed to complete the mission successfully? And what would happen to Medea, who had already lost so much? As the Argo cut through the waves, carrying its heroes away from the island of Colchis, the tension still lingered in the air. Aeetes would not be easily defeated, and his revenge was on the way. But for now, the Argonauts had something else to worry about: the Golden Fleece, which was now aboard, still in Jason's hands, and the threat of the dragon that had guarded the relic. The Cave of the Fleece was a mysterious place, surrounded by enchantments and magical creatures, but the greatest danger was the dragon itself, which protected the golden skin of the winged ram. Even after the sleeping potion cast by Medea had made the monster fall asleep, the danger was still not completely gone. The dragon was now simply waiting for an opportunity to wake up and take its revenge. They knew that when the time came to leave, the dragon could awaken at any moment, and the Argonauts' escape would no longer be an easy task. It was then that Orpheus, the master of the lyre and one of the most talented musicians in ancient Greece, had an idea. He knew the power of his music and understood that in moments of great tension, music could be the key to calming even the wildest of creatures. He proposed a bold solution to ensure that the dragon remained in a deep sleep long enough for the Argonauts to escape Colchis without further problems. Orpheus, with his golden lyre, approached the edge of the cave where the dragon was kept. With a serious look, he began to play a soft, almost hypnotic melody. The notes flowed like a calm river, and soon the sound enveloped the cave like a mist. The music was magical in itself, with the power to calm even the fiercest of beasts. The notes played by Orpheus were not mere sounds. They had the power to penetrate the dragon's soul, making it relax even further into its deep sleep. The Argonauts watched in silence as the dragon, once huge and menacing, now seemed like a tranquil and peaceful creature, immersed in a deep sleep that would last as long as it took for the group to make their escape. The magic of Orpheus' music worked in a nearly supernatural way, as if he had become a master of nature itself. Once the dragon remained still, its large scales glistening in the starlight, Jason approached cautiously and, with a smooth motion, retrieved the golden fleece from its resting place, now free of any resistance. The golden velvet of the pelt seemed to glow with mysterious power, and he knew the mission was finally complete. But as the group prepared to leave, a new wave of tension enveloped the Argonauts. Even with the fleece in hand and the creature asleep, Aeetes would not be easily deterred. They still needed to escape Colchis and its subjects who were hunting the heroes. However, with Medea's magic and Orpheus's music, the group had managed, for the time being, to secure their safety. The Argo was ready to depart, and the journey back now became a race against time. Jason, looking at the Golden Fleece, felt a mix of victory and unease. Even with the relic in hand, he knew the mission wasn't over and that many challenges still awaited them on the way back home. Now, with the dragon asleep and the fleece conquered, the hardest part was yet to come. Escaping Colchis, and at the same time dealing with the growing weight of Medea's choices, who, despite helping the Argonauts, continued to carry an immense burden. And on the horizon, the fury of King Aeetes was approaching, and everyone knew that the real fight was far from won. The Argo cut through the waters, its keel steady against the choppy sea, while Jason's heart beat heavily, mixed with relief and unease. The Golden Fleece was safely aboard, but the greatest challenge was yet to come. Aeetes, the furious king of Colchis, wouldn't stay behind for long. His anger and thirst for revenge were immense, and in his empire, few could face the weight of his wrath. Soon, the Argonauts heard the ominous sound of the winds blowing fiercely. Aeetes didn't hesitate to gather his fleet of swift ships, ready to hunt down the fugitives. The pursuit was about to begin, and the atmosphere aboard the Argo became tense. Jason, Medea, and the other heroes knew time was against them. Their only hope was to gain enough distance before Aeetes' ships caught up. Medea, with her eyes fixed on the horizon, felt the weight of guilt pressing against her chest. She knew that her betrayal of her father had put everyone in danger. Despite the help she had given Jason, the price of her actions was now painfully clear. Aeetes would never allow them to escape with the fleece. What had started as a mission of honor was now turning into a desperate race for survival. Jason commanded the navigation skillfully, but he knew the Argo's dexterity might not be enough to escape the king's fleet. The pursuit was becoming a matter of life or death. They needed a strategy, something that could divert the attention of their pursuers and give them a real chance to escape. It was then that Orpheus had an idea. Use the magic of music to confuse the pursuers. He knew that with his lyre, he could create a melody so hypnotic and captivating that it could make the enemy fleet lose its way, allowing the Argo to gain the necessary distance. But it wouldn't be easy. The music had to be powerful, immortal, capable of dominating even the fury of the sea and Aeetes' hatred. Orpheus, with his lyre in hand, began to play a deep melody, full of emotion and power. The music was not only to calm the hearts of the heroes, but also to affect the very nature around them. The waves of the sea seemed to transform. The gentle breeze began to whisper with an enchanted melody, and even Aeetes' ships began to slow down, their sailors being overtaken by the deep sound of Orpheus's lyre. But the escape was still not guaranteed. King Aeetes, determined not to lose his relic, sent his best sailors to pursue the Argo with even greater ferocity. The confrontation seemed imminent, and as the sound of the lyre echoed across the sea, the tension mounted with each passing minute. Pursuit lasted for days, and the Argonauts began to feel the effects of exhaustion. The journey was tough, the wind growing stronger, the sea more stormy. Even with Orpheus's music creating a distraction, the enemies were getting closer by the hour. It was when the wind calmed and night fell over the sea that the real battle began. Aeetes had finally caught up with the Argo, his imposing ship approaching. At great speed, the Colchian sailors were ready for battle, but Medea, with her sorcerous powers, knew it was time to act once again. She, with her eyes closed, invoked an ancient spell, calling the winds for a storm. Within minutes, the sea began to roar with force, as if the planet itself were rebelling. The water rose, and the waves began to stir so wildly that Aeetes' ships were forced to retreat, unable to sail through the fury of the storm. The Argo, on the other hand, with Medea's magic and the crew's control, managed to keep its course. Jason and the other heroes kept the boat steady while the Argo glided through the turbulent waters, gaining ground with each passing moment. Even the sound of Orpheus's lyre, which had always been so soothing, now blended with the roar of the storm, creating an indescribable effect, a force almost divine. Finally, after hours of battling the winds and waves, the Argonauts managed to escape Aeetes' pursuit. The sky cleared, the storm subsided, and the Argo found itself once again in open sea, free from the looming threat. But even with the victory, everyone knew this wasn't the last time they would face the king of Colchis. Medea, though victorious, knew that her betrayal of her father was now marked on her soul, and that the consequences would come sooner or later. She looked at Jason, the man she loved, and wondered how far the loyalty they now shared would go. Aeetes had been defeated for the time being, but the journey was far from over, and the price of their choices had yet to be paid. The Argo now sailed more cautiously, the heroes aware that their fight was far from over. They had escaped Colchis, but the world was full of challenges and enemies, and the search for something more important than the Golden Fleece, true freedom, still lay ahead. As the Argo sailed through unknown waters, far from the threats of Colchis, the weight of the decisions made began to become increasingly harder to bear. Medea, with her heart heavy, could not forget what she had done in betraying her own father. She knew that the escape had not been just a simple adventure of heroes in search of glory. There was a price to pay for her betrayal, and fate seemed to be drawing closer with each moment. When the Argonauts spotted the distant coast, a cry pierced the night. Aeetes, furious and relentless, had not given up. His fleet had approached faster than expected, and now it was in full pursuit again. This time, he was determined to capture all who dared steal what was his. The Golden Fleece could be reclaimed, but the Argonauts would not be forgiven for dishonoring the king so easily. Fear gripped everyone aboard. The escape would no longer be just a matter of running. It would be a fight for survival. It was clear that Aeetes would do anything to catch the Argo, and the group knew another battle was imminent. To make matters worse, Aeetes' ships were better prepared and more numerous than before. It was then that Medea had a desperate idea, a way to delay the pursuit and give the Argonauts a chance to escape. She knew that the only way to ensure enough time would be to sacrifice someone. Not just anyone, but someone who was very close to her, someone with a deep connection to her, her own brother, Absyrtus. Absyrtus had been with Medea from the beginning, always by her side on her journey. However, she knew that to save the group, he would have to die. On a quiet night, while everyone slept, Medea made a decision that would haunt her forever. With cold precision, she led Absyrtus to the deck of the Argo. There, with a broken heart and a shattered spirit, she killed him, not allowing him to react, and dismembered his body. She threw the remains into the sea, hoping it would be enough to distract Aeetes and stop the pursuit. The sight of her own brother, torn apart and lost in the turbulent waters, would be enough to make Aeetes stop, Medea thought. But the plan, though cruel, was not perfect. Aetes, upon reaching the shore and realizing what had happened, stopped. Momentarily, but not because he was moved by the tragedy. The pain and sorrow that struck him were overshadowed by rage and a thirst for revenge. He knew he had been deceived, that his children were beyond his control, but the blood of his own son was something he could not ignore. The pursuit was not halted. It only intensified. Medea felt her spirit torn apart, but she could not give into guilt. She knew the Argonauts needed that opportunity to flee, and despite the pain, she remained firm in her purpose, determined to see Jason's mission fulfilled, even if it meant a much greater sacrifice. What Medea did not know was that Absyrtus's death would bring more than just Aetes's fury. It would bring an invisible weight, a curse that would follow the Argonauts throughout their journey. As the Argo left the waters of Colchis behind, Jason observed Medea's somber expression. He knew she was struggling with something deep, something beyond the quest for the Golden Fleece, but he could not ask. The mission was far from over, and they needed to continue, facing their own ghosts from the past. For now, the Argonauts were adrift, with an uncertain fate, and the wind seemed to whisper that something greater and darker was yet to come. Medea's pain, Absyrtus's sacrifice, and Aetes's growing rage were clear signs that the crossing to true freedom was still distant, more challenging and bloodier than anyone could imagine. After Absyrtus's sacrifice, the Argonauts felt the weight of the choices they had made. The sound of Medea's death echoed in their hearts, and guilt became a shadow that was hard to escape. Even amid the flight from Aetes's fury, everyone aboard the Argo knew that something deeper was being compromised. The journey toward the Golden Fleece had become a race against time and their own inner demons. Medea, in particular, felt torn apart. The sight of her dead brother, the betrayal of her father, and the brutality of what she had done consumed her. From within, although she had acted in the name of survival, the price seemed higher than she had imagined. The nights were long and sleepless, and guilt intertwined with the pain of knowing that the future she and Jason had planned was, perhaps, being marked forever by those moments of desperation. But as in every great journey, the need for healing always arises. Medea's remorse became unbearable, and she knew she needed purification, not just for herself, but for the group itself. She knew that if they continued their journey without facing the consequences of their actions, they would be doomed sooner or later. It was then that the name of Circe, the powerful sorceress and Medea's aunt, emerged as a possible salvation. Circe was known for her vast knowledge of mystical and healing arts, and many said she had the power to purify the souls of those who had committed crimes. Medea knew that if they could reach Circe, she could help them break free from the curse that now weighed upon them. Crossing stormy seas and facing treacherous winds, the Argo finally reached a secluded island where Circe, the sorceress, resided. The island was a mysterious refuge, full of exotic plants and fantastic creatures that seemed to be under the spell of an ancient magic. When Medea set foot on solid ground, she felt the air charged with power, and a sense of immediate relief washed over her. Perhaps here she could finally find peace. Circe received them with a serious expression, but her eyes shone with wisdom. She knew what had happened. It was no surprise to her that Medea and the Argonauts had arrived there. She also knew that Medea's sins were not simple, and that purification would require more than just a simple spell. "You've brought shadows with you, Medea," Circe said, her voice deep and calm. "But we cannot erase the past with a spell. What's done is done. However, we can free the tormented souls. If you seek redemption, the purification begins here." With her skilled hands, Circe prepared a complex ritual, combining herbs, potions, and ancient chants. The wind calmed as the sorceress's words intertwined with the nature around them. The ceremony enveloped Medea in a soft, ethereal light. Gradually, The weight of guilt began to dissipate, but the sorceress knew that the process would be slow. Medea could not escape her actions, but the magic would bring a temporary sense of relief. The other Argonauts also underwent purification rituals, with Circe offering each one a path of reflection. It was not just a matter of healing physical wounds, but also spiritual ones. Jason, although still deeply involved in his quest, was touched by the sorceress's magic. He knew his decisions had also left deep marks, and purification seemed the only way to truly move forward. At the end of the ceremony, Medea felt different. There was something new in her soul. Not complete healing, but the sense that she could, at last, breathe again. But Circe, with her wisdom, warned that true. Purification would come only with time and a deep understanding of what loss and redemption truly meant. "Your journey is not over, Medea," she said, with an enigmatic smile. "Freedom only comes when hearts accept the consequences and, above all, true repentance." As the Argo prepared to set sail, the Argonauts were now more aware of the shadows they carried. The journey to the Golden Fleece, though still full of dangers, would now force them to confront their own flaws. Medea knew that despite the relief she had found, the next steps would be the hardest of all. What would come next depended on how each would face the guilt and sacrifices made along the way. The wind, which had once been hostile, now seemed softer, as if somehow the sea too had understood the need for reconciliation. The Argo sailed again, not only in search of the Golden Fleece, but in search of something deeper, the truth of their actions, the weight of the past, and the path to a redemptive future. The wind accompanying the Argo now seemed more favorable, guiding the Argonauts through unknown seas with an unusual gentleness. The atmosphere on the ship, after the purification with Circe, was calmer, but everyone knew the journey was still far from over, and immense challenges awaited them. On the horizon, a new threat loomed. As the Argo advanced through uncharted waters, a strange calm took hold of the crew. The waters were so serene that for a moment it seemed as if nothing could interrupt the peace that was finally beginning to blossom. However, the experienced navigators like Orpheus began to notice subtle signs in the waves, a movement in the waters that indicated something deeper. Suddenly, the winds began to change, and the sound of the waves transformed into something more hypnotic, more entangled. It was a distant melody, almost imperceptible, but it touched each of the heroes' hearts deeply. The beauty of the sound slowly grew until it became a captivating song, an irresistible harmony that seemed to reach the souls of the men aboard the Argo. It was at that moment that Orpheus, with his artistic sensitivity, realized something was wrong. The music, though beautiful, had a terrible power, an irresistible, seductive force. He knew that this melody came from the sirens, mythical creatures that lured sailors with their fatal songs, leading them to certain death on treacherous rocks. Jason, already alert to the dangers surrounding them, immediately ordered the rowers to silence, but it was too late. The sound of the sirens had become so ingrained in the air that its effects began to spread throughout the ship, influencing each of the men aboard. The Argo began to slowly drift off course, as if it had a life of its own, drawn by the enchanted voices. It was then that Orpheus, without hesitation, picked up his lyre and began to play. His fingers moved with mastery over the strings, creating a melody more powerful than any siren's song. His music was not merely a response, it was an antidote to the dark magic. Orpheus played with his whole being, pouring into his notes all the strength of resistance, reason, and clarity. The sound of Orpheus's lyre began to clash with the sirens' songs. Slowly, the rowers, who were on the brink of succumbing to the creature's spell, started to regain their sanity. The ship veered back on course, drifting away from the shore, while the sirens, frustrated with the effect of their magic, intensified. Their singing, but now without the hypnotic power they once held. The battle between Orpheus, Melody, and the Sirens stretched on for a while. But eventually, the music of the great musician prevailed, drowning out the creature's sounds. The Sirens, defeated, vanished into the deep waters, leaving behind a heavy silence. When the last echo of Orpheus's music faded, the Argo was free. Tranquility had been restored, but everyone knew that this encounter, though narrowly avoided, was yet another reminder that death lurked at every step of their journey. The group knew they couldn't let their guard down, for other, more deadly and complex challenges were waiting. Medea, though immune to the Siren's song due to her mystical nature, felt the tension in the air. She glanced at Jason, who looked more serious than ever. Orpheus put his lyre away, but his expression was distant, as if he too was absorbing the gravity of what had almost happened. The serenity of the moment was replaced by a clear understanding. The journey to the Golden Fleece would not only be a matter of strength or courage. It would require mental resilience, intelligence, and above all, an unbreakable unity among the heroes. Now, more than ever, the Argonauts needed to trust one another and the unique abilities of each member. Because, although they had avoided the immediate danger of the Sirens, they knew that other challenges still awaited, and with the Golden Fleece growing nearer each day, the path ahead could become even darker and more unpredictable. The wind shifted once more, and the Argo sailed toward a new island. The crew was tired, but the goal was always ahead, the Golden Fleece and the return to Iolcus. However, the journey seemed far from its conclusion. With the encounter with the Sirens still fresh in their minds, the Argonauts were more alert than ever. It was then that land appeared on the horizon, an island known as Crete. As the Argo drew closer, the sea calmed, but a sense of tension in the air suggested that something of great power awaited them. The island was shrouded in an atmosphere of mystery, with towering mountains that seemed to hide something dark. When the ship touched the shore, what seemed to be a peaceful island revealed itself to be the territory of a colossal creature. A bronze giant known as Talos. He was a being made of metal, and his immense size sent a chill through everyone who saw him for the first time. His eyes glowed with the light of the moon, and there he stood, guarding the island like a solitary sentinel. Talos had been forged by Hephaestus, the god of fire and metallurgy, and was an unbeatable guardian, destined to protect the island from any intruders. Though made of metal, he possessed superhuman strength and resistance. His body, hot as a furnace, could crush any ship or invader that came too close. When the Argonauts saw the figure of Talos emerging from the island's shadows, a wave of terror coursed through their veins. They knew that if they didn't find a way to defeat him, the entire journey would end there. But as always, Jason didn't hesitate, and with his heroes, he devised a strategy to face the giant. Medea, with her vast knowledge of magical arts, knew that Talos's metal could be weakened by a combination of magic and cunning. She quickly remembered a spell that could heat and melt the giant's bronze, but she knew time was short. Every movement of the giant was an imminent threat. The Argonauts, led by Hercules and Atalanta, prepared to strike. Hercules, with his superhuman strength, attempted a direct approach, charging at the giant and attacking with his immense hands. His punches landed on Talos, but the resistant metal did not yield. Atalanta, with her agility, tried to dodge and strike at the giant's joints, but she was also unsuccessful. Talos seemed invincible. It was then that Orpheus, who was always noted for his wisdom, had an idea. He realized that in order to bring down Talos, they would need not only brute force, but a precise strike. The giant had a vulnerability in his body, a vein of gold running through his ankle. If that vein were ruptured, Talos would lose his strength. With Medea's guidance, who used her magic to direct the heroes, Orpheus and Hercules worked together. Orpheus distracted the giant with his enchanting melodies, while Hercules used his strength to leap toward Talos' vulnerable point. With a precise blow, he broke the golden vein that kept the giant alive and active. When the vein broke, Talos began to crumble. His body, which had once gleamed with the light of fire, now began to cool and fall apart, crumbling into melted metal pieces. The battle was over. The Argo and its heroes were free to continue their journey. But even after the victory, what lingered with the Argonauts was the sense that the journey was becoming more and more challenging. Each victory seemed to come with a new obstacle, more difficult and deadlier than the last. They were closer to the final goal, but the cost of each victory was becoming higher. With Talos defeated and Crete behind them, the Argo continued its journey, once again heading toward the land of Colchis. But the road ahead was full of uncertainties. The waters were becoming increasingly treacherous, and the Argonauts knew that more challenges awaited them. But for now, they were united, and the next step in the quest for the Golden Fleece was closer than ever. The Argo sailed through the waters faster now, the goal finally within reach. The acquisition of the Golden Fleece seemed in sight, and the weight of past hardships began to lift. The group was united and victorious after so many battles and challenges. However, in their hearts, a shadow of uncertainty lingered, not over the challenges ahead, but over what awaited them upon returning to Iolcus. When the ship finally approached the shores of Iolcus, the city where it all began, anxiety took hold of everyone. Jason knew that, with the Golden Fleece in his hands, he could claim the throne that rightfully belonged to him. But one thing was clear. His struggle would not end with the simple defeat of Peleus. The usurper, now weakened by a string of defeats, would not give up the throne easily. Medea, standing by Jason, looked at the high walls of the city and felt the weight of fate. Her magic may have been crucial in many situations, but nothing could prepare the heroes for what they would face. In the moment of confrontation with Peleus, she knew that the king, now more desperate than ever to retain power, was capable of anything. When Jason and the Argonauts finally set foot in Iolcus, the city seemed unnervingly quiet. Peleus's throne was in sight, but preparations for battle were being carefully made behind the scenes. The usurper trusted no one, not even his own subjects. He knew his downfall was imminent. In facing Peleus, Jason exhibited unshakable calm. His eyes were fixed on the usurper, and he knew that the moment of truth had arrived. Peleus, for his part, tried to appear firm and confident, but his posture betrayed nervousness. He could no longer hide the fear he felt. With a cold smile, Peleus tried to play one last card. He knew he could not defeat Jason physically, but he would use his cunning to try to sway the family and subjects to his side. However, what he didn't know was that Medea had devised a clever plan to deal with his treachery. Medea, with her powerful magic, approached Peleus's daughters and with soft and enchanting words made a suggestion that seemed simple but was fatal. She convinced the king's daughters that if they followed an ancient ritual, they could restore Peleus's youth and with it ensure the family's well-being. The daughters, blinded by their trust in their mother, believed in her magic. Medea instructed her daughters to prepare the spell without revealing the true intention behind it. The young women, eager to restore their father's youth, followed the ritual she proposed. They began to pour the magic potion over Peleus's body, hoping that he would be rejuvenated like a child. But what they didn't know, and Medea kept secret, was that the spell would not bring any rejuvenation. Instead, the potion she had prepared had been altered with a deadly poison, a magical substance that would drain Peleus's strength and kill him slowly. The scene was horrifying. Upon realizing the betrayal, Peleus' daughters were horrified. But it was too late. The poison spread quickly through his body, and the usurper fell into agony. There was no chance of salvation. Pelias died there, in front of his subjects and family, and the city of Iolcos was finally taken by Jason. But the victory was bitter. Jason, who had fought so hard to claim his right to rule, didn't feel fully victorious. The murder of Pelias and the betrayal by his own family left an indelible mark on his soul. Medea, with her magic, once again controlled the fate of those around her. The kingdom of Iolcos was finally in Jason's hands, but his happiness was shattered. The weight of the choices he had made, the loss of his moral integrity, and the price of power were now clearer than ever. Though victorious, he knew that what followed this conquest could be even more devastating. Doubt hung over him. Would the victory of Iolcos truly be a victory, or had he lost something far more important along the way? The city of Iolcos now, under Jason's control, seemed to have achieved a glorious victory. The throne was now in his hands, and Pelias's fate was sealed with the execution of his betrayal. However, something was wrong. Jason didn't feel complete. His conscience troubled him, and the sacrifices made along the journey began to weigh heavily on him. Medea, on the other hand, was not satisfied. She knew that, despite her crucial help in securing the throne, Jason's happiness was still a reflection of her own shadows. The relationship between Jason and Medea had reached a critical point. Medea's magic had been essential for him to achieve victory, but the essence of what he had lost along the journey became clearer with each passing day. The situation reached a point of tension when Jason, driven by ambition and perhaps by the desire for a more secure future, free from further betrayals, began to look for other possibilities. He found solace in the arms of Creusa, the daughter of the king of Corinth, and the idea of marrying her began to take root in Jason's mind. He believed that by uniting with Creusa, his position would be solidified more firmly, removing any threat to his dynasty. Medea, who had given everything for Jason, felt her world crash down. Her betrayal would not only be the loss of her love, but also a brutal reminder of how much she had sacrificed for him. Her heart filled with rage and despair. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing Jason in a new relationship, especially with someone who, to her, represented everything Jason had ceased to be. Someone who would take her place, who would strip away everything she had built. Medea, with her intelligence and skill in magical manipulation, decided that she wouldn't let Jason escape unscathed. She planned an act that would break Jason's heart, a deadly trap that would bring devastating revenge, not just against him, but against everyone around him. With Jason and Creusa's wedding about to take place, Medea infiltrated the celebration, disguised as a gracious hostess. She knew she had the power to destroy everything Jason loved, and what she would do next would be a silent but relentless torture. She gave Creusa a gift, a gown, rich in shine and beauty, which she claimed to be a magical jewel, a welcome gift for Creusa's new life with Jason. But what Creusa didn't know was that this gown was poisoned, laced with a magical poison that would cause the young woman's skin to burn until her death. With every touch of the garment, the pain would be unbearable. Creusa, unsuspecting, wore the gown in front of everyone, but as soon as she did, the pain began to take over her body. Her skin burned, and she fell to the ground, screaming in agony. Creusa's suffering seemed endless, and as she died, everyone present stood paralyzed, unable to comprehend what was happening. Jason rushed to her, panic-stricken, trying to help, but nothing could be done. Creusa was doomed, and her death would become yet another tragedy in Jason's already bitter story. Medea then appeared before him, as cold as ice, revealing the full extent of her revenge. She wasn't done yet. What she did next would be a fatal blow to Jason. In her fury, Medea turned to the children she had with him, the last ties to her love, the last remnants of the once strong and passionate relationship. In a moment of desperation and rage, Medea did the unthinkable. She killed her own children. The scene was a nightmare for Jason, who, utterly shocked, watched the tragedy he himself had helped set in motion. Medea, with the coldness of a sorceress, who knew exactly what she was doing, had destroyed everything. Their children, the fruits of their love, were dead, and the last thing left for Jason was a life of eternal regret. With the blood of Creusa and the children still fresh on her hands, Medea fled, disappearing into the shadows of the night, leaving Jason to face the weight of his actions and the bitter loneliness he had chosen. The revenge was complete, but the price was much higher than anyone could have imagined. Jason, now alone and desolate, found himself facing a deep emptiness. The betrayal he had caused to Medea, the love he destroyed, and the pain he caused himself, all of it weighed heavily on him. His soul was corrupted by the pain and the wrong choices, and the city of Iolcos, now in ruins, reflected the state of his own life. What should have been a great victory had now become an endless nightmare, and Medea's revenge had turned Jason's glory into his own condemnation. After the devastation brought by Medea, Jason's life no longer followed a path of glory. His victory over Peleus seemed worthless in light of the tragedy that plagued his existence. The kingdom of Iolcos was marked by pain and death. The ruins of his life were reflected in the ruins of his home, and he now walked down a road of desolation. His mistakes and choices were being paid for with a terrible price. But the cruelest part of all was that Jason was no longer being punished just for his own mistakes. The gods, as always, were watching closely, and Jason's fate had been sealed the moment he began to stray from his own morality, guided by ambition, selfishness, and betrayal. Zeus, the leader of the gods of Olympus, was not known for being merciful with those who dishonored divine order. Seeing the suffering Jason had caused to himself and others, he decided that the time for divine vengeance had come. Jason had strayed from virtue, from the honorable destiny that had been given to him. Morality, now broken, would no longer be tolerated. Medea, despite causing all that tragedy, was also under the gods' watchful gaze. She too had defied the natural order of things, destroying the lives of her own children, and though she had powerful reasons for doing what she did, she was also guilty in the eyes of the gods. The divine pantheon had a cruel way of dealing with those who crossed the line of what was considered just, and no mortal was above divine judgment. The first manifestation of divine punishment was Jason's death. The gods, in their vengeance, decided that he could not live in peace. After years of suffering and bitterness, the once great hero, now aged and broken, saw his life come to a tragic and symbolic end. Jason, who had once been the greatest of all heroes, died crushed by the wreckage of the very ship he had commanded, the Argo. The great ship, which had long been a symbol of his glory, was now also the herald of his ruin. The Argo, which had sailed through stormy seas and faced monsters and giants, was now in a state of decay. Upon returning to Iolcos, the ship broke apart under the weight of time and tragedy, and Jason, who had always relied on the strength of his vessel, was fatally struck by a piece of the broken wood. Jason's death was a cruel reminder to all who sought glory without considering the consequences of their actions. Once a revered hero, he saw his life end in a simple and humiliating way. The grandeur he had pursued with so much effort was ultimately reduced to a silent tragedy, and the gods once again proved that human power, when used selfishly and destructively, is never left unpunished. For Medea, the story didn't have a peaceful ending either. After her escape, she led a life marked by solitude and pain. What she had done to Jason and their children was irreparable. Once a powerful sorceress and lover, she now lived surrounded by guilt and loss. Although she fled to distant lands, away from the forces that could punish her, divine wrath did not let her rest. The gods, ever watchful, sent her a fate that, though not a direct punishment, was equally cruel. Medea died alone and desolate, without the children she loved and without the man who had been her destiny. The pantheon, which had looked at her with severe eyes, did not forgive her transgressions. She was left to perish in deep silence, forgotten by generations who knew her only as a symbol of tragedy and vengeance. The gods' vengeance was complete. Jason and Medea, the two protagonists of a story of glory and decay, paid the price for their choices. Power, betrayal, and ambition had led both to a tragic end, and the final fate of each became a warning for those like Jason, who believed they could control the future without bowing to morality and divine justice. With the fall of both, the story of the Argonauts and their epic journey ended not in triumph, but in an echo of warning. The gods, no matter how distant they may seem, always find a way to correct the imbalances caused by men. The cycle of glory and defeat is never immune to the invisible hand of fate, and in the end, all those who challenge higher powers inevitably find their downfall. The story of Jason and Medea reaches its bitter and inevitable end. Jason, once the hero who defied the gods and faced countless dangers in his quest for the Golden Fleece, now found himself in a deep void, crushed by his own ambition and all the losses he had caused. The throne he had so desired brought him no satisfaction. On the contrary, it brought him the weight of his wrong choices. Pride and the relentless pursuit of power had cost him everything he loved. Jason's life, after the death of Medea and the children, became an existence of regret. He tried to move forward, but pain and loneliness consumed him. The man who had once been the bravest and most admired of heroes was now reduced to a spectre, a shadow of his former glory. He wandered through the city of Iolcus, which now also mirrored his own decay, marked by desolation and chaos. In his final days, Jason met a cruel and symbolic fate. What seemed like a simple accident was, in fact, the fulfillment of a destiny he could never avoid. The Argo, the ship he had commanded with so much pride, was the final reminder of his fall. Now aged and weary, Jason approached the ship, now abandoned and decayed by time. He sat in its shadow, perhaps hoping to relive the glory days, but the Argo, with its fragile and broken structure, collapsed upon him. The timbers of the ship crumbled and crushed him, ending his life as humiliatingly as it had been tragic. Jason's last scene was that of a defeated hero, buried by the very history he had written but could no longer control. His body was found among the wreckage of his own glory, an ending that reflected the irony of his life. A man who had once faced giants and monsters, but in the end could not escape his own mistakes. Meanwhile, Medea, who had already fled, after her terrible act of revenge, met her own dark fate. She sought refuge in distant lands, but guilt and pain were constant companions on her journey. Medea knew that, although she had destroyed Jason and taken away what he loved most, there was no return for her. Remorse ate at her heart, and solitude followed her wherever she went. Even with all her magic, Medea could not escape her own pain. She had sacrificed so much for Jason, and now, looking back, saw everything she had lost. Her children were dead, Jason had betrayed her, and she found herself lost in a world where there was no place left for her. The story she had written with her own hands, full of passion and vengeance, was now a legend of despair and loss. Medea's end was shrouded in mystery. Some say she died in lonely exile, far from everyone, with no power or magic left to save herself. Others say that in her final attempt to control her destiny, she took her own life, escaping the pain that had consumed her. Whatever the truth, Medea died alone, a shadow of what she once was, and her name, once revered, had now become synonymous with tragedy and vengeance. And so the story of Jason and Medea came to an end, a story of heroes and villains, of glory and fall, of love and destruction. They had been characters in an epic journey, but in the end, their lives became a cruel warning about the limits of human pride and the consequences of betraying what is most precious. The gods, ever watchful, had fulfilled their role, and the cycle of vengeance and suffering was complete. What remained was an emptiness, a reminder of what was and what could have been. Jason and Medea were now remembered not as the great heroes of a legend, but as two destinies crossed by destructive passions and the cruel intervention of the gods. And so ends the epic journey of Jason and Medea, a story of heroism, tragedy, and vengeance, which teaches us about the consequences of the choices we make and the immeasurable power of the gods. If you enjoyed this video and want more incredible stories like this, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and share your opinion. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any epic adventures. Let's explore more fascinating legends and myths together. See you in the next video.